Hey guys, and welcome to week 8 class notes for government. This is Mr. Moore, and I'm preparing these notes for my students so they can learn all the requirements that are necessary for the state standards and the framework for this American democracy U.S. government class. Here in week 8, we're going to be focusing on the Bill of Rights. And essentially, by the time we get done with these notes today, I want every single one of my students to truly know what their rights are. I believe that if you don't know what your rights are, then you really don't have them. If you ignore this government class and you ignore the Constitution and you ignore the Bill of Rights, the opportunity for you to be successful in this democracy that we live in, this republic that we are a part of, um, I guess in one simple way, down here in the corner is truly what I believe. If you ignore your rights, they'll go away. And that's the opposite of what we want. On September 17th, 1789, 39 of the 55 delegates to the Constitutional Convention signed a new document called the Constitution. Many of those who did not sign the new Constitution objected to signing the document because it did not have a Bill of Rights. But the first 10 amendments to the Constitution would be added a short time later. Students, please remember that the Constitution of the United States of America is the supreme law of the United States, empowered with the sovereign authority of the people by the framers and the consent of the legislatures of the state. It is the source of all government powers and also provides important limitations on the government that protect the fundamental rights of the United States citizens. The preamble to the Constitution says that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. As a reminder, then, on September 17th, we recognize Constitution Day, and that's a great thing to do in this class because we are always trying to bring everything back to the Constitution because it is the ultimate source of power in this country. A president does not supersede the Constitution. When a president is inaugurated or swears an oath of office, they swear to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and abroad. And so I really want us in this class to understand the Constitution. Remember that the Constitution is a set of 7 articles. And we've gone over in this class what each one of those articles does. Article 1 talks about the legislative branch, Congress. Article 2 talks about the executive branch, the president. Article 3 talks about the judicial branch, the Supreme Court and federal court system. Part 4 talks about relation among states. Okay? Part 5, or Article 5 is what I should say because they're articles. Article 5 deals with how you add or change the Constitution, meaning amendments. And that's what the Bill of Rights is, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Part 6 reminds us of, Article 6. I shouldn't just say part. It is a part of it, but we technically use the word article. So Article 6 of the Constitution deals with national supremacy. That is, the federal government supersedes the state governments. And of course, 7 is ratification. That is, people signing, the founders, when they signed the document and put it into effect. At first, many states and delegates from states at the Constitutional Convention would not sign the document until the document preserved people's personal freedoms in writing. They wanted a Bill of Rights. So the writers added the first 10 amendments, additions or changes, to the Constitution known as the Bill of Rights. So today, in 2020, the year 2020, there are 27 amendments total. The first 10 of those amendments are called specifically the Bill of Rights. Okay? The Bill of Rights is a list of our freedoms and our rights. It was finished, and put into action by 1791. That's just a few years after the Constitution was written. So it took a little time and some debate and discussion, but finalized by 1791. Today, there are 27 amendments. My goal today is to go over some of the Bill of Rights. I kind of split it into 2 weeks because I want to take time to go over them in depth. I love it when we're in class because students often ask a lot of questions because students do care about their rights. This is a little different when I'm pre-recording it, but we can still cover the basics. And then if you have questions, you could ask those questions in class. So let's deal with amendment number 1. The First Amendment of the Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the rights of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The First Amendment is probably the most packed amendment and probably the most important one, the one that most people really care about. When I ask people what the First Amendment, what right it gives you, most people say freedom of speech. And that's true, it does. But if you notice, the first thing it says is that it gives us freedom of religion. So that's the first thing you might want to jot down into your notes and really solidify in your head that the government cannot prohibit us from a free exercise of religion. And there is no official religion in the United States. That's another key point. Some countries have official churches or religions, but in the United States, there is not one. And the government has promised, or this amendment says, that the government cannot force us to be a certain religion or even to be religious at all. If you want to be an atheist, that's your right. It shouldn't matter if you're Muslim, if you're Buddhist or Hindu, if you're a Christian, even a Protestant or a Catholic, it shouldn't matter. Out of the 45 presidents of the United States, 44 have claimed to be Protestant Christians. One of them, JFK, John F. Kennedy, was a Catholic Christian. So you might think that religion shouldn't matter or doesn't matter in the United States, but obviously it does. If you listen to any debates, presidential debates and discussions, oftentimes religion does get brought up. So I think that's a really important one to pay attention to, freedom of religion. Now, of course, most people are familiar with freedom of speech and freedom of the press, but freedom of speech does not mean you can say whatever you want. I'm going to repeat that. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press are along the same lines. Freedom of speech is what you say. Freedom of the press is what you write. So freedom of speech and freedom of the press does not mean you can say or write whatever you want. It means you can write what is true. If you believe something is true and you have evidence to prove that it's true, then you can say it. But it doesn't mean you can just go out and say whatever you want. Sometimes when people talk about this, they say that you can't yell fire in a crowded building. And I'm using air quotes you can't see. But here's the argument that was brought up early in the United States. Freedom of speech doesn't mean you can say whatever you want. Like, say you're sitting in a crowded room and you yell fire and people start to panic and get hurt. And you say, well, it's freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want. But it wasn't true. And you could have caused damage or hurtful things. Same thing if you go to an airport and you say, I've got a bomb. And you say, and they arrest you. And you say, well, I was just kidding. That's freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want. No, you can't say whatever you want. You can say what's true. If you say something that's not true, or you write something that's not true, then you could be held liable. And that's a fancy, lawyer word or law word that kind of means you did something or said something that you shouldn't have done. You didn't have proof. So that's why in a lot of classes, we always talk about people, if you make a claim, you need to back it up with evidence and reasoning. And that's not just for writing in a social science class. That goes for your discussion and how you talk and what you do. If you type stuff on Facebook or Snapchat or texts or emails or anything electronic, that still is, you could be held liable. There are people who have gone to jail for saying horrific, mean things that were not true about people on Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media platform is out there, the newest thing up and coming. If you slander someone's name, you could go to court and get in trouble. And you could say, well, freedom of speech, I can say whatever I want. No, you can't. You can only say what is true. So if you believe something's true and you have proof or evidence, then yes, you can say it. Okay? The other ones that are really important right here is to peaceably assemble and to petition the government. What petition the government means is to protest. It's absolutely okay to protest. You can protest against anything you want, and you can never be arrested for protesting. And you might say, well, Mr. Moore, I saw in the news that somebody was arrested at a protest. True. But they didn't get arrested for protesting. If there was like burning fires and smashing car windows and breaking stuff or violence, then you could be arrested for smashing windows, burning things, vandalizing, those kind of things. But you'll never get arrested for protesting. So there's a huge difference. As long as you're peaceably protesting, you can protest. Can students protest? Yes. However, if you were skipping school to protest, you couldn't get arrested for protesting, but you might get arrested or, get a fine or a citation for skipping school because you're a minor and you're required to be at school. So there's all kinds of little what ifs that we could ask. And that's what's kind of fun sometimes in class to discuss these things. But you can never get arrested for protesting. If you do something illegal while you're protesting, then you could be arrested for that. Okay? And some people have been questioning a lot of these things lately. People are saying that there's fake news out there, which there is. And people are saying, well, that's freedom of speech doesn't cover fake news. I mean, if it's not true and you write it and you cause problems with people because you lied in print or, verbally, then there could be ramifications against you. Also, a lot of people who are religious have been frustrated, like during this shutdown for COVID-19, where people aren't able to go to church. And the government says, well, we're not breaking the First Amendment rights. You can still worship. You just can't meet in a big group because we're concerned about a pandemic, a disease that could cause serious health concerns to other people. So there's a lot of debate going on. Do citizens have rights that the state must respect? And if so, what are they? Well, this is the First Amendment, and that's the most important one, okay? So please, if you have any questions about this, bring them to class so we can discuss them. Because oftentimes I'll spend 10 or 15 minutes just on this topic alone, having a discussion of what it means for your First Amendment rights. When I say First Amendment, there's actually multiple things: freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, the right to assemble peaceably, and the right to petition, aka you can protest, okay? So, what is the role of religion in a democracy? This is something that's really interesting because in the United States, when our country was being formed, our founders grew up in a world where people were being persecuted for their religious beliefs. And so the founders of our country decided when they formed the Constitution to make sure there was a clear separation of church and state. I hope that you all paid attention in your 10th grade history class, because you should have studied something called the Reformation, where you learned about huge religious wars that took place in Europe during the 15 and 1600s, or 16th and 17th centuries, where people were being killed because of which Christian church they were a part of. And different rulers were requiring their subjects to be Catholic or requiring their subjects to be Protestant. And it was a huge deal. And so when the 13 colonies were being formed, the founding fathers of our country said, hey, we really want to make sure that people have a right of conscience to worship how they want. Okay. I have some little visual aids that kind of give you visual representations of the first 10 amendments. I'm going to go over these one at a time, and now we're going to cover number 2. Number 2 is the right to bear arms. And most people know that the Second Amendment, when we say the right to bear arms, is the right to own a gun, to defend yourself and your family. The actual Second Amendment says these words: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In other words, if the government has all the firepower and the regular citizens have nothing, then what's to prevent the government from pushing its will on the regular people? This goes back to the time period when we had 13 colonies and the British were controlling the colonists. And so the colonists felt like it was essential to protect their property and to protect their family and to protect their rights. They needed to be able to defend themselves. Now, how old do you have to be to own a gun? What are the gun laws in different states? If you've committed a serious crime, can the government prevent you from getting firearms because you've already proven that you're not following the laws and that you're a danger to society? So the answer is always it depends. California does have some very restrictive gun rules, whereas some places like Wyoming are very wide open. But American citizens have the rights to own guns. I own several guns myself, okay? And I've taken my own kids out shooting so that they would know how to load a gun and defend themselves. But I also understand on the flip side that there are some serious issues with guns, especially if they're getting into the hands of criminals. And so there's huge debate that goes on because some people say, well, criminals are going to get the guns, legal or illegal. So if I'm a regular citizen who's a good citizen and I'm not causing trouble, I still got to be able to defend myself. And then some people say, well, there's been huge mass shootings and there's been school shootings. And look at what if we have guns in people's hands, it's causing problems. And some people say, well, that's the person's problem. You know, the fact that they have a gun, that makes me want to have a gun even more so I can protect myself. And so there's huge debate. It's probably one of the most controversial topics in the United States. And it's probably something that I'm going to try to bring up in class, at least to get some people's thoughts on it. But what I'm doing here is trying to teach the basic facts. So what is the role of civil dissent, and when is it necessary? In other words, when should we go against the government? And the founding fathers believed that it was our right, even believed it was our duty to, if there was bad government and you try to fix it peaceably, but you can't fix it peaceably, to overthrow government and replace it with one that will protect people's rights. But it shouldn't be done for light causes. And that's, of course, some of the wording, and I've altered it slightly, but you can go read that in the Declaration of Independence. And so the Second Amendment is a very controversial one of the amendments, but nonetheless, I want to make sure that we kind of lay out the facts, and I've just read for you the actual wording in the Bill of Rights, and kind of talked about some of the controversy surrounding this Second Amendment. Again, if you have thoughts, comments, questions about it, there's always those what ifs that we need to bring up in class. Those you could bring up in class as you're taking notes. You could write those down and could be discussed in class. Normally is. I've got some videos that I've embedded in my notes. Remember that my notes are posted on my website, so you can always go and find those notes. And normally in class, I would play these notes, and then we could have some dialogue about them. This is the Third Amendment, and it's one of the more significant ones back in the colonial times, but isn't so used today. Out of all 10 of the first amendments of the Bill of Rights, this is the one that's used the least in the modern world. It really has to do with quartering troops. It was a problem back in colonial times where British troops could come in and seize your personal property, your cows and chickens and your food and your crops and your house, and commandeer it for their own use. But it does lay down the groundwork for later, laws and court rulings, where we today believe that we have the rights to our private property and that the government can't come and take it without compensation. So it kind of leads to that idea, along with other laws and precedents that was set by court cases. But the Third Amendment says, okay, no soldier shall, in times of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. So in other words, we're protecting private property. And although it doesn't specifically say that, that's been the general mentality that's gone forth since this was written. This is the least used Bill of Rights amendment in the modern world, but it's very important when it was written. And it does provide the basis for the idea that the government can't take or use your private property without compensation. Okay? You ever seen a cop show and the cop's chasing the bad guy and he pulls out a gun on a regular citizen and says, I'm going to commandeer this vehicle because I need to chase down the bad guy. If the police ever really did that, the police department, the government, right, those agents of the government would have to compensate you for the car that they took. In other words, they couldn't just take your car to chase down the bad guy. The police department would have to give you the $40,000. I mean, you would probably end up in court suing the police department for like whatever, $40,000 to replace your car that they damaged and destroyed while they were chasing down the bad guy. So although it looks cool in the movies, I mean, there are real life ramifications and stuff, okay? So anyways, that's the general idea of this Third Amendment. Specifically, it's the quartering of troops, but it kind of leads to other things. Again, if you have questions or thoughts, you don't understand what this means, then you need to bring that up in class to help you understand what your rights are. Because this, again, that mentality of you have private property and that the government can't just come and take your stuff, okay? It doesn't have the right to do that. That's huge for Americans, okay? Again, I have some visual aids kind of outlining all of the 10 amendments, and I'm trying to pound that into your head that the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. There's a total of 27 amendments. So even after the first 10, there's some important ones. Like number 13 is not in the Bill of Rights, but number 13 ends slavery. That's huge. And number 14 grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States, no matter color or creed or religion or anything. Okay? And, so there's a whole bunch of other important amendments outside of the Bill of Rights. But really this week we're going to focus on some of these rights. And we're not going to go over all 10 this week. I'm kind of splitting it up. And again, usually it takes a lot longer than this in class because we're having some good discussion. And students oftentimes ask some really great questions because they want to know what their rights are. This is another huge one. All the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights is huge. But this one right here has to do with search and seizure. Okay, and it has to do with what the police can and cannot use in a court of law against you. Like what kind of evidence can they use? Did they get the evidence in a proper manner? This is not supposed to protect guilty people, but to protect innocent people from not being harassed by the police or government agencies. So let me go ahead and read the Fourth Amendment as it was written in the Bill of Rights as the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall be issued but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So, the police cannot search you or your car or your house or your stuff without a warrant. I'm sure you've seen this in movies or you've heard about this, or maybe it's happened to you. But if the police want to search because they think that you're guilty, remember, you're innocent until proven guilty. But if they think that you're guilty of committing a crime or breaking some law, and they have what they call probable cause, and they have to give a reason why they think that they should be able to search you. And in order to get a warrant, they have to go to a judge and they have to present their case to the judge. And it can be quick. They can say, I have probable cause. So for instance, if the police pull you over in your car and they say, hey, I need you to pop the trunk. And you say, no, I don't have to pop my trunk unless you have a warrant. That's true. Even if the police are yelling at you like, hey, you little teenage punk, open up your trunk. And you say calmly, no, I don't have to unless you have a warrant. Now, it's not very difficult for the police to get a warrant, especially in our modern world. Usually there's two police officers. One can stand there in front of your car, and the other guy can go back and on a laptop in his police car, he can email a judge and get a warrant faxed over to him to search your trunk. So again, it's not to protect innocent people. It's not to protect guilty people. It is to protect innocent people. Sorry, I was getting going right there and misspoke. But the purpose of this is to protect the innocent, right? Not to be harassed. So if the police pull you over, and sometimes there'll be two police officers. One of them will be shining a light in your back seat. If he sees like open alcohol containers, can he use that in a court of law to get you like a DUI, like a drunken driving incident? Yes, he can. If he actually has to open the door and look under the seat and he doesn't have a warrant, then he couldn't use that as evidence. So it's really specific. If they can just see it without actually searching you, then they could use that as evidence in a court. If they actually have to dig and look for it, then that could be dismissed as not relevant evidence in a case. Remember that the teaching strategy in this class that I'm trying to get you to think about is how the real world works. You make a claim, you provide the evidence to prove your claim is right, and then of course you tie it together with the reasoning. That's how all court cases work. That's how the world works, okay? Now, there are some places where people waive this Fourth Amendment right. For instance, if you go to Disneyland, and to get into Disneyland, they say, hey, open up your bag, and they search your bag. So if you were to tell some of those security officers or any kind of like police that's on, Disneyland property, and they said, hey, open up your bag and show us what's in there, and you said, no way, man, you don't have a warrant, you can't search my bag, then they say, then take a hike, buddy, you can't come into our facility. So if you go onto Disneyland property, you're waiving this Fourth Amendment right. They do have the right to search you because you chose to go onto their property. That same thing would apply in an airport, right? Because we're looking out for like the common good of everyone and everyone's safety above your Fourth Amendment rights. Then when you go to an airport, they can pull you into a room. They can go through your entire bag. They can refuse to let you onto an airplane. Obviously, they have the rights, and they scan people's bags and check you down and do the X-ray things and all those kind of things that they do at airport security. If you ever try to say this is not fair because I have a Fourth Amendment right, then obviously they would say, well, then you don't come to the airport. Fine, we're not going to search your bag, but you can't get on a plane. So again, you just got to remember, if you go to a sporting event like a football game, or say you walk onto school campus, some people are like, well, the school security checked my bag and they didn't have a warrant. That's true because you purposely chose to step onto school property. And for public safety, we have all waived our rights to this amendment when we stepped onto school property. Okay? So if you don't step onto school property, then it's true. The police cannot search you. But the minute you step onto school property, you've waived this right. And so again, there's always a what if question like, hey, the police came to my house and they showed me a warrant. Okay, do I have to let them in? A couple of years back, Actually, it's been quite a while now. It was when I was teaching at a different high school, a high school called Chino High School down the hill. I had a student in class who actually was listening to the same basic lecture, right? Things haven't changed in 20 years when I first started teaching. But this student said, Mr. Moore, do you have a right to look at the warrant before the police execute it? And I said, yes. What a great question. Look at the bottom part right here where it says, particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or thing to be seized. So I said, look, if the police ever show up at your house and they say, we have a warrant, and you're like, oh, well, I guess they have a warrant, they can come in. It might be true. What you should do if a police ever say they have a warrant is you need to take a pause. Don't stress out. Take a pause and read the warrant and see what it allows the police to do. Because, this is not a joke, but a couple days later, literally, this girl told me, she said, Mr. Moore, I am so glad I listened to your class, because the police did come to my house and they said that they were looking for my brother and they said they had a warrant, but I listened to you and I knew that I could read the warrant. And so they wanted to come into her house and check her brother's room and go through his stuff. And she looked at the warrant right there before she let them into the house, and she read the warrant, and it only gave them permission to check the outside of the house. Now, if she had allowed them to walk in, then they would have said she gave us permission to walk in. And later she said, well, it just said in the warrant that you could look on the outside. And they would have said, well, but you let us into the house. And that's true. If you let them into the house, if you say, okay, come on in, then you're giving them permission. It doesn't matter what it says in the warrant. So anyways, again, this is not to protect guilty people. This is to protect innocent people. I hope if you have any questions about these notes, you'll bring them to class, because I would really like to if there's a possibility to have any kind of discussion, I think that would be great for all of us. Again, I just covered the first 4 amendments of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the first 10, okay? But I'm going to choose to cover some of those other things later, okay? I think that's just necessary. I'm breaking it up into 2 weeks. So we're going to cover 5, 6, and 7, the rights of the accused, next week, along with sometimes number 8 is clumped in there. And then 9 and 10 are the kind of catch-all phrases that kind of help us understand that not everything is covered in the Bill of Rights. We still have rights outside of the Bill of Rights, okay? Who really impacts your day-to-day life more? And again, if I can ever make a pun with my name, I certainly will. The president, the governor, or the local mayor. So right now in 2020, how much does the president really affect your life? Sometimes people get all hyped up about the presidential election, but in reality, maybe the governor has more to do with how life is really happening. I have family that live in other states like Idaho and Utah, and they're back in school, like back in regular school, because their governor, the legislative branches in their state said, hey, we think we can handle this pandemic and still go back to school. But in California, we're obviously doing virtual learning in 2020, doing this online digital distance learning thing. So was that the president that made that choice, or was that more of a local choice? So who affects your life more? I need you to know by name the name of the governor of California right now. That's Gavin Newsom. Okay, if you're wondering politically how he stands, he's definitely on the left side of the political spectrum, which we haven't talked a ton about in this class. It's something I usually save for second quarter, because in first quarter I talk about more how government should work. And then in second quarter, I talk about how it really does work. The Constitution does not require political parties. In fact, our first president highly recommended we don't have political parties. And that's my opinion too. I do not like having political parties, because they only look out for their own self-interest and not for the good of the country. But Governor Newsom does fall on the left side. And in our country, that's generally, we call them Democrats. Our president right now in 2020 is Donald Trump. He falls on the right side of the political spectrum, and we call that the conservative side. In our country, the political party is a Republican side. Do you know who the mayor of Apple Valley is? Because he might have even more to do with what's happening with business, schools, and local things. So again, sometimes we focus all on the president because he's the executive branch of the whole country. But maybe we should look at the executive branch of our state, or maybe the executive branch of our town. We have a town council. That's the legislative branch of our town that makes the laws, and the mayor enforces them. Then we have our legislative branch at a state level, the state assembly, and the executive branch of the state, which is the governor. And of course, that all happens at the federal level too. So, what an interesting question to think about who really affects your life. I need you to learn these 20 countries, and I'm going to give you a study guide in class before we take the final for first quarter. I tried to pick out some of the most important countries around the world and the countries that you're probably hearing about the most in the news. And I'm going to have you learn these countries, okay? On the first test, we had to learn continents. That's an important word. There's only 6 continents that have people on it. North America, right up in here, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. Okay, so we already learned that. But what I'm doing on this one is I'm having you learn some countries. That's a different word, countries. So I need you to learn, and this is a good start right here, Canada, because it's our neighbor. And it also has one of the top 10 strongest economies in the world. The United States is a country you have to be able to point to on a map. I would be embarrassed for you if you graduated from high school and could not point to your own country on a map. That is the United States. It's composed of 50 states that are interconnected politically and physically. Some of them are connected. Some of them are not connected, like Hawaii and Alaska are part of the United States, but they're not connected like physically. And then, of course, Mexico, which is in the top 20 strongest economies of the world, and a huge population, a lot bigger population than Canada, even though Canada is obviously bigger. So Canada, the United States, and Mexico, obviously you need to know those countries in North America. Probably the 2 strongest economies in South America would be Brazil and Argentina. There's other countries as well, but I think those are the strongest economies and probably the most dominant on the continent. That's debatable. It's obviously kind of an opinion, but I think that everybody should know where those countries are. On the continent of Africa, there is more than 50 countries, but South Africa has the strongest economy and is the most stable politically. Nigeria is the most populated in Africa, so more people live in Nigeria than any other part of Africa. So South Africa, Nigeria, and Egypt. Egypt, of course, is famous for its antiquity, right? The pyramids and the Sphinx and its ancient culture, but it's also a powerhouse in the modern world as well. On the continent of Asia, I need you to know a few countries, starting here with Japan, the world's 3rd biggest economy. China, the world's 2nd biggest economy, but largest population. And of course, India. India has the world's 2nd biggest population, but it's going to probably pass up China here pretty quick. I put a couple of stars here because the United States has fought wars and has really important political ties with some of these countries here. We have Afghanistan, we have Iraq, we have Saudi Arabia, and we have Iran. There's other countries I could have labeled there, and we're going to try to learn some geography in this class, but I thought that might be a nice start to the Middle East. I could have put Syria and Jordan and other places on there, but I tried to keep it small this first time. Those are some countries. Now, in Europe, Europe has an organization called the European Union. It's a political union and also an economic union. And the European Union has some of the richest countries in the world because over the last 500 years, Europeans have taken over and dominated the planet Earth. And so I need you to know Great Britain. It's also sometimes called the United Kingdom. So that would both be right answers on the test. France is in the top 10 strongest economies in the world, and so is Great Britain in the top 10. So is Germany, and so is Italy. Okay, Russia kind of goes back and forth. It's right around the top 10. It depends when you Google it. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Economies go up and down. It's obviously the world's biggest country. Economically, it definitely falls within the top 20 for sure. Okay, so I need you to start to learn some countries, and I'm leaving this on my notes so you can go and check it out. I'm also going to give a study guide in class to make sure that every single person knows. So there are some other amendments outside of the Bill of Rights that are like significantly huge. You can see on this little chart, it kind of tells you what all 27 amendments are. And I already kind of mentioned some of these, like the 12th Amendment to the Constitution changed the how we vote for the president and the vice president. It's so weird. It used to be that the person who got the most votes became the president, and the one who got the second most votes became the vice president. But that could cause some serious problems if you were running against somebody and you barely beat them and they got second place, so they become the vice president. And then you guys hated each other. How could you work together in a functioning government? So they kind of changed it where the president and the vice president run together. And he was huge, right? That's a big deal. 13th Amendment, we already talked about ending slavery. The 14th Amendment grants citizenship to all people born within the geographic boundaries of the United States. The 15th one grants the right to vote for all citizens, no matter race, religion, okay? The 18th and the 21st are the most embarrassing. We tried to outlaw alcohol in the 18th Amendment, and it didn't work. It created a black market and a mafia and huge crime problems, back in the 20s and 30s. And so we repealed prohibition in the 21st Amendment. So that's kind of a botched one right there. Here's another huge amendment. That's women's right to vote. Tell me something that's more important than that. Man, that's huge. That's half the population. Okay, didn't have the right to vote until after World War I. We're talking just about 100 years ago. If this is 2020 right now, just about 100 years ago, women got the right to vote in our country. The 22nd Amendment limited presidential terms. George Washington served 2 terms, and so every president after just served no more than 2 terms because they respected that rule. That it wasn't even a written rule. It was not in the Constitution. It's just that he set an example. But finally, after FDR broke that during the Great Depression and World War II, we actually wrote it into an amendment to the Constitution. And of course, like number 23, gives those in D.C. a presidential vote. And of course, the 26th Amendment you might really care about because it brought the age to 18 to vote. And some of you might be able to vote in the upcoming presidential election because of the 26th Amendment. So huge deal, okay? How do government actions impact civil society? If a law is unjust, a man is not only a right to disobey it, he is obligated to do so. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence. Now, again, I always have some great videos at the end, like that were made on YouTube, okay? And I'll assign some of those in class, but you're always welcome to go check those out. Thank you for being with us right here. This is week 8. We covered the first 4 amendments in the Bill of Rights and talked about the Bill of Rights in general and also amendments in general. And we'll pick up some discussion in class. Thanks for being here.